Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave. I hope you're doing well. Getting close to the end of the year, and thought I would share with you kind of like a measurement to see how your podcast is doing. We all kind of want to know, I have my numbers, I have my stats, I can see what I can see through my hosting site. They let me know how many people are listening to my episodes, where they are in the world, who they are, how long they listen to my episode. And I kind of want to know, is what I'm looking at, is it even good? Like, am I doing well? How do I even know? So I want you to pull up your stats while you listen to this episode, if you can. If not, later on, look at your stats and review this podcast, because I think you might be surprised at really how well you're doing when you hear some real numbers around podcasting. And I'll have a link to my source and everything that I'm sharing with you so you can double check for yourself and go over it on your own time. But let's take a little health check. How's my podcast doing? And how do I rate compared to the other podcasts out in the world here on the How to Podcast series? Here we go. Okay, so, you sit in the waiting room at the doctor's office. There's like magazines from 20 years ago. There's a couple plastic toys in a box over by the television mounted to the wall. The seats are kind of plasticky, and it feels like everybody's looking at you as you wait to go in to see the doctor. Great, right? Yeah, I know. That's not what I wanted to do today. I want you to feel welcome here as we go through your stats and give you some measurements from what's happening in podcasting as of near the end of the year of 2023. And again, a link to all the stuff that I'll be referencing will be in the show notes. So please go through it yourself and take a look. There's a lot of information there, but there's some key things I want to highlight, which might make you take a big sigh of relief when you look at your stats and wonder, am I doing okay here? Like, am I doing a good job as a podcaster? Is my show healthy? I just want to know. So there's a few things I want to share with you, and probably the one that kind of hit me the most at the beginning was just around the idea of how my show's doing in comparison to others and what good looks like. One of the most popular questions that I hear in podcasting circles and in all the Facebook groups and all that chat is, how many listeners do podcasters get on average? This is interesting. And these stats come from Buzzsprout, which is where I'm hosted for 3 of my shows, and 4 of my other shows are on Spotify for podcasters. But from Buzzsprout, this is what they have given us. Based on downloads per episode within the first 7 days, 7 days for a single episode, as of October 2023, to be in the top 50% of podcasts, you need, guess how many episodes? Guess how many listens do you need? How many downloads? How many listens do you think you need to be in the top 50% of all podcasts? What's the number? It's 31. If you have 31 listens to your podcast within 7 days from the time you release it, so 1 week, if you're at 31 listens, you're in the top 50% of podcasts. So when you're in rooms and you hear people talking about 20,000 downloads, 100,000 downloads, 1 million downloads, and you're like, oh, there's no way that I'm going to ever be at that stage. If you want to be in the top 50% of all podcasts, you need 31 listens, 31 downloads. That's it. 31. If you have 120 listens within a 7-day period, you're in the top 25%. If you have 477 listens or downloads, and in the first 7 days, you're in the top 10%. And if you have 1,155 listens or downloads in the first 7 days, you're in the top 5. And to be in the top 1%, 5,226. So when you hear all these people bragging about their numbers and they seem really, really, really high, and you feel really, really insignificant, 31 is a pretty good target. I think you could make relationships with 31 people where you could count on their listenership within community just by reaching out to them and building up that community base. 31 does not seem unrealistic, even for a brand new podcaster. That's a pretty good goal. So let's work towards that goal. What do you think? Do you think you can do that? 31? I think you can do that. That's a pretty great number, actually. It makes me a big sigh of relief when I see that. 31 downloads or listens within the first 7 days. You're the top 50% of podcasts. Wow. How about the total number of podcasts? As of October 2023, there are around 4,250,179 podcasts registered around the world. And that's down like 8% from December of 2021. So almost 200,000 podcasts are no longer out there. And Apple's actually reporting around 2,633,000 podcasts as of October 2023. So there's some discrepancy even right there between the 4 million globally and the 2 million within Apple. In 2018, there was 550,000 active podcasts in iTunes. What about active podcasts? There's currently, as of October 2023, about 460,000 active podcasts on Apple Podcasts. That's not very many when you compare it to the 4 million of registered podcasts. And it's interesting, in June 2021, there was about 755,000. December 2021, there was 548. April 2022, there was 512,000. November 2022, there was 459. January 2023, 449. May of 2023, 474. So you can see we're hovering around that 400,000-ish mark for as far as what's active. And active simply means that they've released a new episode in the past 90 days. So if you go down to a weekly episodes, that number gets even smaller. So if you're producing a regular content, weekly content on a regular basis, you're doing very well. And the pool that you're swimming in is much smaller than you think it is. You're not swimming in this big pool and you're going to get lost. So keep being active. Just do that, and that'll help grow your podcast. What about when people listen to a podcast? I thought this was interesting. The most popular podcast listening situations are 49% people listen while doing chores, working. 42% listen to podcasts on their way to work as they commute. And 29% say they listen to podcasts while they're working out. What about how they listen? Looks like 93% of podcast consumption happens on headphones. What about the top podcast listening apps? Again, according to Buzzsprout for 2023 in October, Apple Podcasts is still number one at 44%, Spotify at 28%, web browsers, so people listening on their computers, 4.2. Google Podcasts, which is going away, is 3.5. And then we got CastBox, Podcast Addict, Overcast. Apple iTunes is still showing in the charts. Pocket Casts, and then Amazon Music rounds out the bottom on the chart that's given. That's the top 10. So if you're not on these podcasts players, you need to be, because that's where the bulk of the listenership is happening. So if you're only on one, if you're only on Apple, or you're only on Spotify, you're missing out on an opportunity to be listened to on all of these other popular apps. You need to be on there. If you need help with that, let me know. I can help you get set up. It takes one time setup and you're done. You don't have to go back and touch it ever again. So let me help you with it. You need to be in more places than just one. If you're only on SoundCloud, not everybody listens on SoundCloud. You need to make sure that you're on all of the players. And I'd love to help you do that. So be in these top 10 for sure. And again, you can use the link in the show notes and you'll see all of the information here. And I would follow up and make sure you're linked to all of these different places. What about the most popular podcast genres? And this is US numbers. So I'm in Canada, you're in the UK, wherever you are in the world. Use this as a guide. But the most popular podcast genres are: number 1, comedy; 2 is news; 3, social society and culture; 4 is true crime, of course; 5 is sports; 6 is business; 7 is arts; 8, TV and film; 9 is education; and 10 is religion and spirituality. So that's pretty interesting. When we look at the formats for the different types of podcasts that we can do, what is the current podcast format that seems to be the most popular? Solo shows at 43%, what I'm doing right now. Interviews come in at 29%. Co-hosted, which I also do here on the How to Podcast series, is 23%. Round table, where you have multiple people and you go around the table, is 5%. So solo shows seem to be the most popular as far as the type of podcast. So which one are you doing? Maybe you can do a little bit of all of these. Wouldn't it be great if your podcast did all the different formats? Your solo hosted episodes, you bring on people as interviews, you bring on people as a co-host, and you go round table with a group of people. Wouldn't that be awesome? You touch all of the main areas, these 4 parts. And I think it might be a great idea for you to plan when you do your planning for your podcast is, how can I do each of these 4? Keep it in mind. So this is also a big hot topic in podcasting. And I'm surprised by these numbers, to be honest, because I thought they'd be a lot higher based on the amount of noise I hear from people around video podcasting in comparison to audio. The question was, do podcasters record video? In most cases, no. Based on IndiePod census for 2023, they were asked about video podcasting, and only 11% of people that responded record video and publish the full episode. 32% don't record video at all and have no plans to. So that's really interesting, because I would think that it's a lot higher, because we hear a lot of noise around video editing. YouTube, now even Spotify has video podcasts. So I thought that number would be a lot higher, but if you're doing an audio only podcast, you're still good. And I know that there's people who prefer audio only due to privacy issues, not having to get all cleaned up and made up to be on camera. There's all the equipment you have to buy, lighting and cameras and all that stuff. So doing an audio-only podcast, to me, is still what I would say the best way to start podcasting. And if you want to go to video later, you can always do that. But if you're going to wait to buy all the gear to do a video podcast, I would wait. I would wait and start audio-only first, get used to it, develop your craft, and then if you want to switch to video, make the leap. This stat made me extremely happy because I'm recording in this software right now. as we do this episode. So what software do podcasters use? There's so many different types of software. There are some that people just adore, but to me, as an audio editor for music and podcasts, I find it to be overkill. Too many options, too deep in the weeds for a spoken word podcast with the occasional music clip thrown in and maybe a sound effect here and there. You don't really need it. The highest rated app or DAW, digital audio workstation, to record your podcast is, drumroll, Audacity. Yes, because Audacity is free. Hello. And it is so easy to use. If you've looked at it before and you're like, I can't figure this out, you and I need to talk, because it is the most easiest way to record your podcast. And I love this hands down over Descript, over Adobe Audition, which is super expensive, over all these other ones, Reaper, blah, 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 blah. Audacity has been the steady, consistent choice for many podcasters. So if you're trying to figure out what's the best, 48% of podcasters use Audacity. How's that? So lots and lots of stats today, I know. But what about the average length of a podcast? This is also another frequent question in all the Facebook groups. The most common podcast length is between 20 and 40 minutes at 32%. So podcast episodes that are less than 10 minutes, 16%, 10 to 20 minutes, 15%. Like we mentioned, 20 to 40 minutes at 32%, the highest. And 40 to 60 minutes, 21%, and over an hour at 16%. So there you go. That gives you an idea of how long your podcast episodes could be. And again, these are just averages. You can do whatever you want, but it looks like 20 to 40 minutes seems to be the sweet spot for most podcasts. I get asked a lot about how often should I publish my podcast. Buzzsprout's podcast statistics show about the average that people are doing. The most common podcast publishing frequency is about every 8 to 14 days at 38%. Podcasts that release anywhere between 0 and 2 days, every 0 to 2 days is 7%. 3 to 7 days between each episode is 36%. 8 to 14 days between episodes, again, was 38. 15 to 29 days per episode is 18%. And anything over 30 days between episodes at 2%. So we're seeing that sweet spot, again, just between 8 to 14 days. So you hear a lot of every second week podcast episodes. That's where that would lie right there. So when we talk about measuring success, you can measure it in many different ways. But I would say the biggest success for me in my podcast is engagement, interaction with my audience, and meeting people and knowing them by name. When I first started my show, I didn't know who was listening to my podcast. And like I've said before, I didn't make a podcast for a fake avatar. I made a podcast for me. I made the show that I wanted to listen to. And if you like my show, good chance you're going to like me, because I'm making this for me. Again, very selfishly, right? And I'm okay with that, because I know who I am. Instead of talking to a fake imaginary person that I might listen to my show, might not listen to my show, they might be correct, they might not be correct. I have no idea. I just made them up. I know who I am. And I just create the show that I would listen to. I would listen, and I do, listen to my own show. And you probably should too, because then you're going to hear what you sound like, and hopefully you're getting better every time. And if you don't do your own editing and you never check, you don't know what's going out into the world. So if you're looking for an editor who can help you and you can trust to make you sound amazing, and you got a little bit of money that you can spend every episode, I would love to work for you. I will be your editor, and I am here for you. So if you like anything that happens in any of my shows, it's like my online resume for my services and what I can do for you. I'd love to help you with that. So reach out, howtopodcast.ca. So my challenge to you as we think about these numbers and stuff is just to realize that, you know what, we all want to be successful. We want our podcast to grow. We want to reach an audience. We want to maybe make money with our podcast at some point. That's always an option. But the biggest thing is we want interaction and community around what we're doing. We want people to care as much as we care about what we do on a podcast. So as you think about this and as you plan your show, remember engagement with your audience, building community, and then taking that community into the next part of your journey and building something special for them. That is the main focus for you and what you should focus on for your podcast. These numbers, as long as you stare at them, they're not going to get any bigger. And reviewing your stats is important, but do not live and die by your stats. Because as good as stats are, they're still just a snapshot. They don't include everything, and they're not extremely reliable. So as much as we like to talk about our stats, just realize that there's things going on behind the scenes that make it really difficult to pinpoint how good we're really doing. But this gives you an idea about how many listens you should have in the first 7 days of your episode, which makes me happy, and what's going on with your listener audience. If you want more information from what I'm pulling, this was on, I found this online on the podcast host website. I'll have a link for it in the show notes. I would encourage you to read through this and see what's going on in the podcast world. The more you know, the better you can prepare. And as you prepare, you'll serve your audience even better. Wisdom is knowledge. So there's wisdom in the counsel of many is one of my favorite things I've heard people say. And this is a bunch of wisdom from many podcasters responding to surveys. So here's a great way for you to learn from your cohorts and fellow podcasters out there. Any chance you get a chance to be a part of one of these surveys, do it. Jump in, share your thoughts, shape the content that people will be talking about in the future. Your voice matters as a podcaster, and we need your voice. If you need any help with your podcast, howtopodcast.ca, howtopodcast.ca. I'll see you over there. Keep podcasting. Keep showing up for your audience. You're doing great. Proud of you. Let's keep moving forward. Take care. Hey, it's Dave jumping on here at the end. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. Putting this out there for you. You're starting a podcast and you're like, Dave, the technology is giving me a headache. This editing thing is, I don't know. It's banana pants. I can't figure it all out. And you're thinking, if there was somebody who could help me with my podcast, I would pay them to do the editing for me. Guess what? I'm actually doing that. I have clients now, past guests who've been on the show on one of my other podcasts, on this podcast. I'm doing some podcast consulting. I'm doing podcast editing. I'm helping with people launching their podcast, getting it, all the technology stuff, all getting your podcast in all the players, helping you with your YouTube channel, your website. Oh, it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And I would love to help you. So instead of going to Fiverr or Upwork, I've been on there. I keep trying to get on for jobs and nobody's paying attention to me. And I need attention. I would rather work with you as a listener of the show. So here's what I'm saying. Go to howtopodcast.ca, leave me a voice message, tell me what you need, and let's work out something that works for you and your budget. And if you need full service or you just need something quick like a drive-through type service, I'm there for you. I got you. And if you like what you hear on any of my 7 podcasts, I can do that for you. I can. And I'd love to work with you because you are amazing. And I'm there to help you whatever you need. howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know what I can do to help you with your podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.